Hi, my name's Matt McCune. I'm a licensed alcohol and drug counselor with the Youth Service Bureau. Today, I'm here to talk about addressing substance use with your team. We're going to look a little bit at the nature of addiction, what's going on inside the brain. We'll look at risk factors for use and addiction. We'll look at some effects, possible outcomes of substance use and addiction, and then we'll move into what you can do as parents to help support your children. You see my contact info, my phone number. You can reach me by calling or even texting, and you can reach me on my email at any time as well. So a little bit about the Youth Service Bureau. The Youth Service Bureau, YSB, is here to help youth and families in the community. We're here to help your children and the family as a whole be more successful at home, in school, and in other aspects of the community. We offer a variety of different services, including youth-focused family counseling, diversion services, including awareness classes. We do youth and family education, presentations, education sessions, and we also do school-based chemical and mental health support. Chemical health support is where I come in. I work in District 833 in the high schools to provide chemical health support to those students. So the alternative high school, Woodbury High School, Park High School, and Eastridge. We have a few different offices. We're located in Cottage Grove, Stillwater, and Woodbury. And you can contact us at 651-439-8800. Our website is also a great resource with lots of information. Just go to ysb.net. And we're also on Facebook. Okay, so getting into addiction, we're going to jump right in, and we're going to talk a little bit about the science first. This is a crash course. It's meant to just give you a quick general overview of what's happening inside the brain when people are using substances and when addictions develop. So the prefrontal cortex, which is an area in the front of the brain, takes a long time to mature. In fact, it's not until one is in their early to even middle 20s where the prefrontal cortex fully develops. This important area of the brain helps us with attention. It is responsible for critical thinking, decision-making, and planning and looking ahead. So with an immature prefrontal cortex, we're likely to make decisions without fully thinking them through, and we're likely to be more impulsive. Another important thing when it comes to addiction is that the prefrontal cortex counteracts the reward response that happens when drugs enter the brain. And I'll talk about what the reward response is in just a minute. But for our purposes, a fully developed prefrontal cortex helps dampen the effect of drugs on our brain. So in our brain, there's a circuit called the reward system, which many of you may have heard of. And the drugs that are ingested into our brain hijack the reward system. So you might have heard that phrase before as well in terms as it relates to addiction. Our reward system becomes hijacked. When drugs enter the brain, they activate this reward system by releasing excessive amounts of dopamine. And that is the neurotransmitter that helps reinforce behavior. So essentially, normal rewarding activities, food, sex, pleasurable encounters with friends, and so on, release normal amounts of dopamine, and that tells us that those are good things for us. When a drug enters our system and releases way more dopamine than is necessary, our brain can mistake that as being a really good thing for us, when in fact, it's not. And that's what we mean by when drugs hijack the reward system. Another term that I want to touch on quickly is this idea of homeostasis. Now, our brain is very good at getting used to whatever conditions are present. It adapts, which is great in most circumstances. However, when it comes to addiction, that can be harmful. So if a substance is ingested repeatedly, the brain starts to adapt to the presence of that substance. What that means is that the brain may start to produce less of dopamine, which I said is the reward neurotransmitter, but it also helps us feel good because the brain essentially recognizes that the drugs will increase the dopamine on their own, so now less of it has to be produced by the brain. What happens is, as a drug is repeatedly ingested, one's tolerance builds. So the same amount of alcohol or a drug starts to have less of an effect. Also, as the brain gets used to having substances present, when there is an absence of the substance, withdrawal symptoms can occur. So alcohol withdrawals can be dangerous. Many people have heard that withdrawals from opioids like heroin and prescription pills can be very painful. And that's because the brain essentially has gotten used to those drugs being there. And when they're taken away abruptly, the brain needs time to readjust. And this lastly brings us to this idea of whether addiction is a disease, which is the idea that the medical community has adopted, as well as most professionals in the field. Some people still consider addiction to be a choice, but when we look at what's going on in the brain, we can start to see that what we choose to do can really be impacted by things like our reward system, or whether our prefrontal cortex is mature enough for us to really think through decisions. It can be very painful once there is a new homeostasis that forms and we go through withdrawal. All these things really drive our decisions. So it's much more than making good or bad choices. Once we're at the mercy of these substances, they can be very difficult to stop using. So I'm going to show a short video of how substances can affect the developing adolescent brain.
As teens, people are always telling us we can't do. Do you ever wonder why that is? Why can't I stay up late? What could happen if I just play for 15 more minutes? Who cares if I smoke a joint every now and then? Let's face it, adults may mean well, but they can't really explain why they won't let us do this stuff. The thing is, there's actually a really cool explanation, and it has to do with our brains. From the outside, the brain of a newborn looks just like a smaller version of an adult brain, but there's a big difference. There's a ton of stuff that still needs to be programmed into a young person's brain. That's where our life experiences come in. How we interact with what's around us shapes our brains until we're in our mid-20s. We can't feel our brains changing, but they are super busy building circuits and programming. So how does this happen? Every little thing that happens to us can change our brain in huge ways. At short distances, our experiences can make or break connections between brain cells. By guiding the creation of circuits, experiences shape our perceptions, memories, and everything that makes us unique. But they also affect our brain across longer distances. This involves the construction of thick bundles of fibers that connect different brain regions. By creating this complex network, experiences help increase the brain's bandwidth, allowing it to work better and better. You've got to keep in mind, these short and long-range connections are influenced by everything we do and everything that happens to us. But this is awesome news. It means we are the programmers of our brains. Every decision, good or bad, influences how our brain develops. Let's talk about taking drugs. For example, pretend this is the keyboard you are using to program your brain. Using drugs just for fun or to get high would be like scrambling the letters on the keyboard. Now, if you scramble the letters on the keyboard after the program is written, that can lead to temporary errors or make it hard for the program to run for a while. But if you scramble the letters while the program is being written, the program can incorporate catastrophic, long-lasting glitches. This is why teens are better off without drugs. We are in the middle of coding our brains, and drugs can cause real problems that can last a long time. And yet, drugs are just one of the many possible ways of scrambling our keyboards. For example, not enough sleep, lack of exercise, or eating too much junk food can also harm our brain programs. So yeah, I get it. It's annoying to be told what we can and can't do, but I would rather focus on my ability to shape my brain through smarter decisions. It turns out we have far more control than we thought. We can use this information to choose our own paths and give ourselves the best possible futures.
So from this video, which might be useful to even show your children, explains essentially that drugs can really impact the developing brain and alter its course from a healthy, normal maturation to possibly a stunted maturation. So I want to go over some quick facts about teen drug and alcohol use that might be useful to remember. So half of all new drug users are under the age of 18. In this day and age, drugs and alcohol are being experimented with in the early teenage years. However, parental involvement, engagement, has been shown to be the most important preventative factor. And we'll touch more on that later. Some more general stats: about 1 out of every 5 teens have abused a prescription medicine. And in fact, many teens actually gain access to these prescription meds just in their own homes. So it's always good to check what old prescriptions might be lying around. To give you an idea of the amount of teens that are generally using now or have used recently, 22% of teens have used marijuana in some form in the past month. About 29% have drank, while 14% have binge drank, meaning that they've had 5 or more drinks in one sitting. Also, about 30% have vaped either nicotine or marijuana, or both, in the past month. Actually, the overall use of all illicit substances and alcohol has been trending down in the past few years among adolescents. However, vaping, which I'm sure you're aware of, has become much more popular, both nicotine vaping and marijuana vaping. I included a link here that can show you some more data. It's from the National Institute of Drug Abuse, so you can find that online. Okay, let's talk about some risk factors. Basically, what makes someone more likely to develop an addiction? Well, for one, the earlier one starts using, the higher the risk is going to be. Other mental health issues, anxiety, depression, ADHD, bipolar disorder, any other mental health problems are going to increase the risk of substance use, because as human beings, we like to try to self-soothe and self-medicate. And using substances is often a way we try to do that. A history of trauma, abuse, or neglect will all increase the risk of substance use among teens and young adults. And neglect can be even, lack of attention being directed to your children, very loose boundaries can also set the stage for teens getting into substance use, lack of supervision. All those can be important factors. Difficult transitions, a big move, or grief and loss, the death of a close friend or a family member. Substance use is also, often a way to cope with major changes and loss. If a teen is connected with a social group that begins to use, peer pressure is very powerful. That can be a risk factor. Also family history. So if there's a family history of mental illness or a family history of alcoholism or drug addiction, that's gonna be a risk factor as well. Studies have shown that addiction is at least partly hereditary. So there is a genetic component to it, but also there's an environmental component to it. And that brings me to the last risk factor, which is family culture. If certain substance use is normalized within your family, if drinking is normalized within your family, that may lead to increased alcohol use. Now we can look at some possible effects of substance abuse and addiction. So using substances increases the risk of a mental health disorder developing if it already wasn't there before. Lots of substance use often can result in increased anxiety or depression. And in fact, most people with substance use disorders have a comorbid mental health disorder as well. Comorbid just meaning that there are more than one disorders present. That's usually the case. Increased substance use increases the risk of suicidal ideation, thinking about suicide, and suicide itself. Like I mentioned before, quitting substances abruptly is for one, very difficult to do and oftentimes very painful. So it might be situations like that that could possibly lead to suicidal ideation or a loss of hope if one feels like they are completely in the grips of an addiction. With more substance use and substance abuse comes a higher risk of getting in trouble with the law, having legal problems, and also for teens, it might mean a decline in grades. Substance abuse also carries with it a greater risk of being the victim of assault. It could be sexual assault or other forms. Part of the reason for this is that generally, if one is using substances, they may be putting themselves in environments that are more dangerous. Furthermore, low self-esteem, lack of confidence can arise from substance abuse. So can isolation and the loss of relationships. So what are some warning signs of use and abuse that you might be able to look for if you're not sure that your child is using? So there are some physical signs of use. Pinpoint pupils is usually a giveaway. Bloodshot eyes can occur from marijuana often. And of course, smells of smoke and alcohol usually linger for quite a while on clothing. Also, excessive fatigue or tiredness can begin to occur if a teen starts using regularly. Secrecy or erratic behavior might occur. Things that just might, seem off may point to substance use. Another hallmark of increased substance use is a loss of interest in activities that one usually does, hobbies that one enjoys. When a teen starts to use substances regularly, oftentimes they may stop engaging in other activities that used to be fun for them. Another warning sign could be a new social group that your child is hanging out with, new friends coming out of nowhere, new friends that are hard for you to meet. As I said before, one increased risk factor of use is the social group that your child is involved in. So that's something to look for too. Another one is noticeable changes in appetite. A lot of substances will affect appetite, either really increasing it or decreasing it, depending on the type of substance. So along with warning signs, one thing that's always hard to distinguish, or maybe hard to distinguish, is if you already know that your teen has engaged in some use, trying to determine if it's normal, experimental, things that other teens go through, or if it's more, if it's a sign of a substance use disorder developing. So the hallmark of any addiction is an inability to control use. Once an addiction is formed, oftentimes one can't stop using. When they start, they can't stop even though they might have a desire to. They begin to use more and more to achieve the same effect. They begin to have to deal with withdrawal symptoms, and cravings become stronger and stronger when they don't have the substance. And lastly, more time and energy is spent focusing on either using or getting the substance. Most often when substance use becomes a problem, relationships start to become strained or damaged. Also, when substance use becomes an issue, one finds it difficult to take care of responsibilities at school, work, or home. Another sign of problematic use is the continuation of use despite negative consequences. So here examples might be continuing to want to use despite getting in trouble at school or getting arrested with possession of marijuana or getting in trouble, drinking illegally at somebody's house. These happen often, and they happen to normal kids who don't end up having a problem, but they also will tend to happen to those who are in the beginning of developing a problem. So what are some of the actions that parents and caretakers can take? The most important thing to do is to open a dialogue with your child. We want to create a safe space where honest communication can occur. And I'll talk a little bit more about how to do that in a minute. Respecting the child's autonomy is also really important. Through the teenage years, your child is, developing an identity, and the ability for your child to make their own choices becomes very valuable. So that when that is threatened, it might backfire. Be mindful of the warning signs, that we talked about. Again, if things seem off and odd, then most of the time there is something off or odd going on. Addressing underlying issues. So like I said before, a lot of kids use to cope because it, at first at least, seems like an effective coping skill. Makes them feel all right when things are not going all right. So if there are problems in the home that are being pushed under the rug or are not being discussed, it may be wise to try to resolve those things. Having clear boundaries and rules. This one is very important. Having your child know where you stand if something occurs, and then following through and enforcing those boundaries. Also, there is places for you to seek your own support. Al-Anon, which you may have heard of, is the support group sort of parallel to Alcoholics Anonymous. And then also communicating with other parents in your community or the parents of your child's friends can be helpful. Modeling healthy behavior. So if you're a parent that likes to drink or smoke on your own, just being mindful of how you do that, where you do it, and what your child is seeing you do, because oftentimes children look to their parents and caretakers as to what's okay to do and what's not okay. And if you're suspicious of your child using and they're adamantly denying, but you're still not buying it, there are home drug tests that you can buy. You can also request for an assessment to be done if you think your child's use is problematic. That's a service that the Youth Service Bureau provides. There's also other organizations that can do assessments as well. So having the conversation around drug and alcohol use. It's important to try to ask direct questions, but with a compassionate and understanding tone. This might help your child feel a little bit more safe in being honest. Staying calm and avoiding strong emotional reactions is also important. If your child knows that you are going to react strongly with a lot of anger perhaps, then your child is more likely to deny or minimize use. Talking about meaningful reasons not to drink or use. Some children may not be aware of the negative effects of use and what it could mean for them, especially if they haven't encountered any negative consequences yet. Brainstorming ways to say no to peer pressure. So if your child is worried about succumbing to peer pressure, then a conversation on how to say no can be really beneficial. You may even want to share your own experience if that's relevant. Having your child be able to relate to you can be really powerful. Lastly, it's best to avoid shaming someone and excessively punishing someone around their use. Like I said before, boundaries and rules are important, but these tactics of shame and excessive punishment usually don't produce good results, and research has shown that. So the bottom line here is that children and teens who feel loved, heard, and supported are much less likely to develop problematic patterns of use. That's the most important factor, and that's where a strong relationship between you and your child can really pay off. So just a quick note about resources. If you're considering treatment or therapy, there are a whole bunch of options in and around the Twin Cities. It's as simple as just going online and going to Google to figure out which place might be a good fit for you. There's also Alcoholics Anonymous and Narcotics Anonymous. St. Paul actually has one of the best recovery communities in the entire world. There are meetings everywhere. So if your child is open and willing to attend, it's a really easy thing to do. You can visit ysb.net, click on the chemical health tab, and there's a lot of information, articles, and websites you can visit there. So just to close up, I thank you for watching this presentation. I hope you might have learned something. I hope it was helpful, and I hope I can answer some of your questions in the Q&A section. We're a nonprofit, so we always appreciate any help you can give us. Donations are always welcome. Sharing what you learned here with others, spreading the word, and bringing in YSB to schools in your community, to the faith community or your business community can be helpful. And then we have a YouTube channel that you can subscribe to as well. There are other presentations on other topics that you can find there, and you can find more information about us and about our staff. So again, ysb.net is the website, and thank you for viewing this presentation. Again, my name is Matt McCune, and I'm the chemical health specialist at the high schools in District 833, including the alternative high school. Thank you, and have a great evening.